I was washing dishes on a Sunday afternoon when someone knocked on my front door. I opened it to find a young woman holding a little boy who had my husband's exact eyes, his nose, his smile. She looked at me and said, "Your husband is my son's father, and he's been hiding us from you since before you got married." My name is Claire, and I am 30 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Nashville, Tennessee, with my husband, Ryan, and our 2 children. Our son, James, is 5 years old, and our daughter, Sophie, is 3. Until 8 months ago, I believed I had a solid, honest marriage built on trust and communication. I believed I knew my husband completely. I believed we had no secrets between us. I was wrong about all of it. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand exactly how deep this betrayal runs. I met Ryan when I was 24 years old. We were both at a mutual friend's birthday party in downtown Nashville. He was 27 at the time, charming, funny, and incredibly attentive. He made me feel like the only person in the room. We exchanged numbers that night and went on our first date 3 days later. From the very beginning, Ryan presented himself as an open book. On our second date, he told me about his parents' divorce when he was 12. He told me about his college girlfriend, how they'd broken up because she'd moved across the country for work. He told me about a car accident he'd been in at 22 that had given him a scar on his left shoulder. He shared things that felt vulnerable and honest. He made me feel trusted, which made me trust him completely in return. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. During those 2 years, I met his family, his friends, his co-workers. I thought I understood his entire history. I thought there were no surprises left. I said yes to his proposal without a single doubt in my mind. We got married when I was 26. It was a beautiful wedding, small and intimate, just close family and friends. Ryan cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. His vows were personal and heartfelt. Everything about that day felt real and true. James was born the following year. Sophie came 2 years after that. We bought a house in a neighborhood with good schools. Ryan got promoted at his engineering firm. I worked part-time as a graphic designer from home. Our life was busy and full and happy, or at least I thought it was happy. Looking back, there were moments. Small things that didn't quite fit. Times when Ryan's phone buzzed and he'd leave the room to answer it. Times when he seemed distracted or stressed without explanation. Times when he'd take a call late at night, stepping outside onto the back porch and speaking in a low voice. When I'd ask about it, he'd say it was work. There was always a work explanation, a difficult client, a project deadline, a colleague having problems. I accepted every explanation because I had no reason not to. I trusted him. That trust was the biggest mistake of my life. It was a Sunday in March. Ryan had taken James and Sophie to his parents' house for the afternoon, giving me a few quiet hours to catch up on some design work and do some housework. I was at the kitchen sink, washing the breakfast dishes, enjoying the rare silence, when the doorbell rang. I dried my hands and went to answer it. On my front porch stood a young woman I'd never seen before. She was maybe 25 or 26, with red hair and tired eyes. Standing beside her, holding her hand and looking up at me with wide, curious eyes, was a little boy. He was around 4 years old, small for his age, with dark brown hair, and my husband's eyes. Exactly my husband's eyes. The same shade of green, the same slight tilt at the corners, the same long lashes. I noticed it immediately, but I pushed the thought away. Lots of people had green eyes. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Are you Claire?" the woman said. "Claire Henderson?" "Yes," I said cautiously. "Who are you?" She took a deep breath, like she was steeling herself for something. "My name is Amber, and this is Mason." She looked down at the little boy, then back at me. Mason is Ryan's son. The world tilted. I actually grabbed the door frame to steady myself. I'm sorry, what? Ryan is his father, she said, her voice steady but her eyes full of something complicated. Guilt, maybe, or exhaustion, or both. Ryan and I were together before he met you. When I found out I was pregnant, he asked me not to tell anyone. He said he wasn't ready to be a father, that he'd just started dating someone new. He's been paying child support privately, in cash, so there was no paper trail. But Mason is 4 years old now, and he deserves to know his father. I can't keep doing this anymore. I stood in my doorway, completely unable to speak. My mind was spinning, trying to process what she was telling me. Ryan had a child, a 4-year-old son. He'd known about this child since before we got married, through our entire engagement, through 5 years of marriage, through the births of our own 2 children. He'd known, and he'd said nothing. How long? I finally managed to say. How long has he known? Since before I was showing, Amber said. He was there when I took the test. He drove me to my first prenatal appointment, and then he asked me to disappear. He gave me money to move to another city. He set up the cash payments. He said he'd be involved in Mason's life quietly, but that no one could know. And you agreed to that? I said, not accusingly, just trying to understand. I was young and scared and alone, she said. I didn't have family support. The money he offered meant I could take care of my son. I thought eventually he'd come around, that he'd want to be more involved, that he'd tell you the truth himself. But 4 years went by and nothing changed. Mason's starting to ask about his dad. He sees other kids with fathers and he asks me why he doesn't have one. Her voice cracked. I can't keep lying to my son. He deserves better than that. I looked down at Mason. He was looking up at me with those achingly familiar green eyes, completely unaware of the bombshell his mother had just dropped. Would you like some water? I heard myself say, because my brain apparently couldn't process the enormity of what was happening and had defaulted to basic hospitality. Amber looked surprised, then nodded. Sure, thank you. They came inside, and I sat them at my kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Ryan and I ate dinner with our children every night. I poured 2 glasses of water with hands that were shaking so badly I nearly spilled both. Amber told me the full story. She and Ryan had dated for about 8 months. It wasn't serious, she said, or at least that's what Ryan had told her. They were just having fun. When she found out she was pregnant, she'd been shocked, but also hopeful. She thought maybe this would bring them closer. Maybe they'd build a life together. Instead, Ryan had panicked. He told her he'd just met someone new, someone he was really serious about. He couldn't be in 2 relationships at once. He couldn't be a father right now. He'd set her up financially if she kept the pregnancy quiet. And she, desperate and alone and without other options, had agreed. She'd moved to Memphis. She raised Mason on her own. Ryan sent money every month, cash in an envelope, no return address, no direct contact. Occasionally, he'd text her a burner number to check on Mason's health. Once, when Mason was a year old, he'd driven to Memphis and met her in a parking lot to see the baby for an hour. That was the only time he'd ever actually met his son. He sends money, Amber said, but he's never been a real father. Mason doesn't know him, and now Mason is asking questions I can't answer. I tried calling Ryan last month to tell him I was done keeping this secret, that Mason deserved better. Ryan begged me to give him more time. He said he'd tell you himself, but another month went by and I knew he never would. So I found your address and I came here. I sat across from her and looked at Mason, who was happily drinking his water and looking around my kitchen with innocent curiosity. He pointed at a drawing on the refrigerator, one that James had made at school. Who made that? He asked me. My son, I said. His name is James. Mason nodded seriously. I like it. My heart broke for this little boy who had no idea what was happening. He hadn't asked for any of this. He was just a child who deserved a father. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ryan. Heading home soon. Kids want McDonald's for dinner. Sound good? I stared at that message for a long moment. Normal, casual, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to collapse. I need to ask you something, I said to Amber. Does Ryan know you're here? No, she said. I drove straight here this morning without telling him. He'll probably call me when he gets home and realizes what I've done. Okay, I said. I appreciate you telling me the truth. I know that wasn't easy. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry for my part in this. I should have insisted he tell you years ago. But I was focused on taking care of my son and surviving. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility to fix your marriage. But watching Mason grow up without a father, watching him feel that absence every day, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. You did the right thing coming here, I said. She and Mason left about 20 minutes later. She gave me her phone number in case I had questions. She said she wasn't looking to cause trouble, she just wanted her son to have a real relationship with his father. I stood at my front door and watched them drive away. This woman and her little boy with my husband's eyes, and then I closed the door and stood in my hallway and tried to breathe. My husband had a child. My husband had known about this child since before we'd even gotten serious. He had proposed to me knowing. He had married me knowing. He had watched me give birth to our son and then our daughter, knowing he already had a child out there being raised without a father. Every year of our marriage, every anniversary dinner, every family vacation, every bedtime story with our kids, every quiet Sunday morning over coffee. All of it had been happening alongside this secret, this enormous, life-altering secret. I called my best friend, Dana. She answered on the second ring. Hey, what's up? I need you to come over, I said. Right now. I need someone here before Ryan gets home. She heard something in my voice and didn't ask questions. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Dana arrived in 12. I told her everything while she sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face going through approximately every emotion a human face can express. Oh my God, she kept saying. Oh my God, Claire. I know, I said. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I said. But I need to talk to him. I need to hear him say it out loud. I need to see his face when he has to admit what he's done. Ryan arrived home at 5:30 with James and Sophie, both carrying Happy Meal boxes and chattering about something that had happened at Grandma and Grandpa's house. My children ran to me, and I hugged them both a little too tightly, breathing them in, grounding myself in their reality when everything else felt surreal. Ryan walked in behind them, smiling. Hey, babe, Dana, nice surprise. Are you staying for dinner? Dana looked at me. I looked at Ryan. Kids, I said, keeping my voice steady, can you go eat your dinner in the playroom and watch a movie? Mommy needs to talk to Daddy about something. James, who was 5 and perceptive, looked between my face and Ryan's face. Is everything okay, Mommy? Everything's fine, sweetheart, I said, because what else could I say? Go watch your movie. Once the kids were settled, Dana took a seat in the living room, and Ryan and I sat at the kitchen table. He looked confused and a little nervous, probably reading my energy and knowing something was wrong. What's going on? He asked. I had a visitor today, I said, while you were at your parents' with the kids. He waited. A young woman named Amber, and a little boy named Mason. He's 4 years old. I paused. He has your eyes, Ryan. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched him go completely, utterly white. And in that moment, I had my confirmation, even before he said a single word. Because if it wasn't true, he would have looked confused. He would have said, "Who is Amber? Who is Mason?" He didn't say any of that. He just turned white and closed his eyes. "Claire," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me the truth," I said. "All of it, right now." And he did. Everything Amber had already told me, and more. He confirmed that Mason was his son. He confirmed that he'd known since before we'd gotten serious. He confirmed that he'd been paying Amber in cash to keep it quiet. He confirmed that he'd met Mason once, in a parking lot for an hour, when the baby was 1 year old. He told me he'd told himself it wasn't a real problem because he was providing financially. He told himself Mason was taken care of, that Amber had agreed to the arrangement, that there was no need to disrupt what he was building with me. "I was going to tell you," he said, crying now. "I always told myself I'd find the right moment, but the right moment never came. And then we had James, and then Sophie, and every time I thought about telling you, I thought about losing our family, and I just couldn't do it. So you chose yourself," I said. "You chose your own comfort over my right to know the truth. You chose to keep a secret that affected my entire life. You let me believe I knew you completely." "I know," he said. "I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said. "Sorry doesn't give Mason 4 years of having a real father. Sorry doesn't give me back the choice I deserve to make with full information. If you had told me about Mason before we got married, I could have decided then whether I wanted to take this on. You took that choice away from me." He had no response to that. Because there was no good response. Dana stayed with me that night. Ryan slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling, going back through 5 years of memories and seeing them differently now, shadowed by this secret he'd been carrying. The next morning, after the kids were at school and daycare, I called a therapist and made an appointment for myself. Then I called a family lawyer, not because I'd decided to divorce Ryan, but because I needed to understand my options, my rights, and what all of this meant legally for our family. The lawyer was thorough. She explained that Ryan's cash payments to Amber, while unconventional, had been consistent and significant enough that there was no immediate legal crisis. Mason's paternity could be legally established. Ryan would then have formal obligations regarding child support, and if he chose, custody arrangements. None of this was simple or clean, and all of it would affect our finances. I also spoke with Amber again. I called her the day after she'd visited, when I was a little calmer. We had a long conversation, woman to woman, that went in a direction I hadn't expected. She was not a villain in this story. She was a young woman who'd been in a difficult situation and made the best choices she could with what she had. She hadn't tried to break up my marriage. She'd actually tried to protect Mason while protecting herself. The decision to come to my door hadn't been made lightly. She'd agonized over it for months. We talked about Mason, about what he needed, about what a healthy relationship with his father might look like. She wasn't asking Ryan to choose between families. She was asking Ryan to step up and be a real father to the son he'd been hiding. I found something unexpected in that conversation: respect for her, and a recognition that we were both women who had been failed by the same man. Ryan and I started couples therapy. Our therapist was direct and unflinching. She told Ryan that what he'd done was a profound betrayal of trust, not just because he had a child outside our relationship, but because he had consistently, deliberately denied me the truth for years. She told me that my anger was completely justified, but that the path forward required me to decide what I actually wanted. What did I want? That was the hardest question. I thought about leaving Ryan. I thought about it seriously, for weeks. I imagined our kids going between two houses. I imagined starting over at 30. I imagined the logistics and the heartbreak and the loneliness of rebuilding a life from scratch. But I also thought about our marriage outside of this secret. Before Amber knocked on my door, I'd been happy. I'd felt loved and supported. Ryan had been a good father to James and Sophie, a good partner to me, a good provider. Was that all negated by what he'd hidden? I didn't have a simple answer, and our therapist told me I didn't need to have one right away. She told me that deciding whether to stay or go after a betrayal, this significant, was not a decision to be rushed. The hardest conversation came about 3 weeks after Amber's visit. Ryan and I sat down and talked about Mason. "He deserves to know you," I said. "He's your son. He's James and Sophie's half-brother. That's just reality, and pretending otherwise doesn't change it." "I want to be in his life," Ryan said. "I should have been in his life from the beginning. I know that now. I know I handled this completely wrong." "You need to meet him," I said. "Properly, not in a parking lot for an hour. You need to be his father." "I know," he said. "But what does that mean for us? For our family?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But we can't figure out what it means for us until you first figure out what it means for him." Ryan called Amber and arranged to meet Mason for the first time properly. He drove to Memphis on a Saturday. Amber took Mason to a park and introduced Ryan as a friend of the family, just to ease into it gently. Mason apparently showed Ryan his favorite swing and talked about dinosaurs for 45 minutes. Ryan came home that night with red eyes. "He's amazing," he said. "He's just this amazing little person, and I've missed 4 years of his life." "That's your fault," I said. Not cruelly, just truthfully. "I know," he said, "and I'm going to spend the rest of his life making up for it if he'll let me." The following months were among the hardest of my life. Ryan began building a real relationship with Mason, visiting Memphis twice a month, then eventually having Mason come to Nashville for weekend visits. We had to tell James and Sophie that they had a half-brother, a conversation that was complicated and emotional, and handled with as much care as we could manage. James, with the straightforward logic of a 5-year-old, asked why Mason didn't live with us. Sophie wanted to know if she could give Mason her old stuffed elephant since he probably didn't have many toys. Children are sometimes better at acceptance than adults. My relationship with Ryan went through something like a death and a rebirth. The man I thought I'd married didn't exist in the way I'd believed, but the man actually sitting across from me at therapy, breaking down the walls he'd built around his deepest failures, was more real than the perfect husband I'd thought I had. I won't tell you I forgave him easily. I won't pretend there weren't nights when I lay beside him and felt nothing but rage. There were days when I looked at him over breakfast and thought, "You lied to me for 5 years," and felt the betrayal as fresh as the first moment. But there were also days when I watched him video call Mason before bedtime, reading him a story with the phone propped on the counter, and I saw genuine love and genuine remorse working side by side. And on those days, I found something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but was moving in that direction. A year after Amber knocked on my door, Ryan and I are still married. It's not the same marriage we had before. It can't be. Some things, once broken, can only be repaired, not restored to their original form. Our marriage has scars now, but it also has an honesty it never had before. Mason comes to stay with us every other weekend now. He and James have become remarkably close, the way only young boys who share something fundamental can be. Sophie mothers him with the bossy affection she gives everyone smaller than her. Mason has adjusted with the resilience that children somehow manage when adults give them enough stability and love. Amber and I have developed a relationship I never anticipated. Not a friendship exactly, but a respectful partnership in raising children who are connected to each other. We text occasionally about Mason's schedule and needs. We've met in person a handful of times. She has moved to Nashville now to make the custody arrangement easier. And while that initially felt threatening, it has actually made everything simpler. My father-in-law, Ryan's dad, called me privately about 3 months after everything came out. He told me he hadn't known about Mason either, that Ryan had hidden it from everyone. He told me he was deeply ashamed of his son's choices and deeply grateful that I hadn't walked away from the family. It was a conversation that surprised me with its honesty and its tenderness. My own parents were angry on my behalf in the way that parents are when their child has been hurt. My mother wanted me to leave Ryan immediately. My father was quieter about it, but I could see the fury underneath his calm. Eventually, they followed my lead. When they saw that I was working through it, that I was making deliberate and thoughtful decisions rather than reactive ones, they supported me. What I know now that I didn't know a year ago is this. Marriage is not the static thing I thought it was. It is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain. It is a living thing, fragile and complicated, and capable of being broken and mended in ways you never imagined when you were standing at an altar, making promises you believed were simple. I also know that I am stronger than I thought I was. The Claire who answered the front door a year ago and found Amber and Mason on her porch was someone who had never been truly tested. The Claire I am now has been through something that could have destroyed her family and chose, deliberately and with clear eyes, how to respond. I'm not telling you that staying was the right choice for everyone in my situation. I'm not telling you that forgiveness is always possible or always appropriate. Every person's circumstances are different. Every marriage is different. Every betrayal has its own particular shape and weight. What I am telling you is that I made the choice that was right for me and my children after careful thought, good counsel, and honest assessment of what I actually wanted my life to look like. Do I wish Ryan had told me the truth before we got married? Every single day? Do I wish Mason had had a father from the beginning? Absolutely. Do I wish Amber hadn't had to carry this alone for 4 years? Without question. But I can't change what happened. I can only choose what happens next. Mason called Ryan Daddy for the first time 2 months ago. Ryan texted me from Memphis right after it happened. The text just said, "He called me Daddy." And I sat in my kitchen and cried, not from sadness, but from the complicated, messy, unexpected emotion of watching something broken slowly becoming whole. My name is Claire. I am 30 years old. I discovered my husband had a secret child he never told me about. It broke something in me and in my marriage that will never be exactly the same again, but broken doesn't always mean destroyed. Sometimes broken just means changed. And sometimes the changed version is more honest, more resilient, and more real than the original ever was. That's where I am today, living in the changed version, finding my way through it, and choosing every single day to keep going forward. Because my children deserve a mother who is strong. Mason deserves a family that accepts him. And I deserve a life that is honest, even when the honesty is painful, even when the truth knocks on your front door on a Sunday afternoon when you're just trying to wash the dishes in peace. Even then, especially then.